welcome to the Indigenous Voice. Today is the 15th of November. First, I would like to thank the volunteer and SHA staff for making this show possible. And we have with us today from the coalition, Aboriginal Coalition Against Homelessness. We have with us Fran and Gloria. It's really an honor to have you with us and to hear from you about your work and your coalition. But first, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself, Fran and Gloria? Maybe start with the elder Gloria.
Gela Kasla, Nugwa Amanitsa Gloria, Quadjotlan, Lu Mawucha. I was hired as the cultural elder for Priority 1, and it's just an incredible experience. But I was very fortunate to have been brought up with my culture, and so this is just an extension of how I grew up. And one of the main things was food. Our guests never left hungry. So the Priority 1 group is an extension of my family, and that's how they are treated. But I'll pass you on to Fran.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you for having us and to talk about this important work. Gela Kesla, Nugwan Zanau. That is my traditional name. My English name is Fran Hunt-Jinnouch, and I just want to acknowledge and thank the Lekwungen speaking people from the Esquimalt and Songhees Nation for allowing us to do our work on their traditional lands, this beautiful South Vancouver Island. I am Kwagyot Thanguskimuk from Northern Vancouver Island, and I'm the Executive Director of the Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness.
Okay. When and why the coalition started in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. Back in late 2014, the director of the time for the Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness contracted me and basically asked if I could help them to engage with Indigenous leaders. They weren't able to really get a lot of participation at the table to address the disproportionate number of Indigenous homeless in the city. And so I agreed to do it, really as long as I was able to engage island-wide, because it was my view that very likely a good number of the people who were having housing challenges in the city were from one of the 3 tribal groups of Vancouver Island.
Oh.
And so that's what I did. I started at the north end of the island and made my way south and met with leaders and friendship centers and began to have a conversation. And at that point, those involved agreed to form a steering committee and create a vision for our work. And in 2015, we gathered in the Esquimalt Longhouse. Thank you, Chief Andy Thomas, who hosted us. And we brought the people from the street community to be there, and the chiefs and some counselors and elders signed the drum with our vision statement and made a symbolic gesture that we were going to start to have these hard conversations around our people living away from home. And so I say that because the Nuu-chah-nulth, I learned when I met with the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council that they don't ever refer to the people, their people, as homeless. They have a home. And so they refer to the street community or those here in the city with housing challenges as our people living away from home. And that really made me reflect and think about how we just address our people that are living on the streets.
And Gloria, how did you start with the coalition?
Fran is our team leader, and she handpicked a group of us, and it really is an incredible group of people. I raised my hands to Fran. Jessica, who is from Alberta, they call her Sis, the people that we work with. My English name is Gloria Roze, but I didn't want to be called Mrs. Roze or Gloria. I wanted to be called Aunty Glo because the space we have created is it's a non-judgmental space, and they are treated with respect and kindness. And as I said, my main role as an elder is I cook for them. I spoil them with food. I've made blanket wall hangings. So it's a statement for them to be proud of whom they are. One of our Quadyo's words is Altman's Numma, we are one. And so it doesn't matter if they are Coast Salish or Nuchanuth or from our Kwakwala speaking territory or Métis, Inuit. We have a broad range of people, but when they come into our family room, we are one, and it is Fran she's behind the scenes working hard because it was a pilot project, and she's someone has to be there and acquire the funding and just keep us steering in the right direction. Yeah.
Now, in regard to the disproportionate number, I mean, as some know, it's 5% of population are from the indigenous community. But in the same time, there is a high percentage not only in homelessness, in the prison, and a lot of other issues, you see a high percentage. So why is that?
Well, so maybe I should back up a little bit regarding the Aboriginal Coalition. After that gathering on the street, or pardon me, in the Longhouse in Esquimalt, we decided to formalize, and we became a BC nonprofit society. We're now a registered charity, but we chose to be Indigenous-led and to provide support and network with other organizations in the community. And we really believed that we had to bring the Indigenous lens to the work, that we had to frame our own challenges as well as our opportunities. And so even though our work is situated physically here in Victoria, the pilots, the research, everything that we're doing, that information is being shared island-wide because our governance system, we have representatives from Kwakwaka'wakw, Nuu-chah-nulth, Coast Salish, a South and North Island Friendship Center, and some other elected positions. So we really felt that we had to define and articulate what the issue was. And so one of those first steps that we did was to try to determine the scope of the problem, because what I ran up against was it didn't matter who I talked to, what organization I went to, I would hear the same statistic that disproportionate number of Indigenous people were accessing services or whatever. And I would ask the question, well, who are they? Where are they from? That was the information that was not coming back. So we applied for some funds and got a small grant to conduct a survey. And in that survey, we surveyed 100 people who were homeless in the city. And 48% of those surveyed, yes, indeed, they were from one of the 3 tribal groups on Vancouver Island. So 48%. Another 19% were from a First Nations community in BC. So that only left 33% who self-identified as either Métis or from outside of the province. So it really challenged the narrative of that time, because what we were hearing on the news was there were people being given bus tickets one way to Victoria because of the nice weather, and people were coming from across Canada because of our mild weather and our services. But this is a homegrown problem. And when we think about what are those pathways that lead people here, I have heard every shared story. But, you know, really the bottom line and one of the common denominators really has to do with intergenerational trauma, the impacts and legacy of residential schools, child welfare system. You know, many have aged out of care. They've been in care. And it isn't uncommon to hear someone say, I don't fit in my home community, and I'm sure not wanted here in the city. And it isn't because of lack or love or care. In some of our community, like ours, for example, I don't think there's been a new house built since the early 90s. The funding is just not there. In my mom's community, where I mainly grew up, there are long wait lists for housing. And even if there was housing, it doesn't necessarily reach the target population that we work with because the focus is on families. So often the people on the street are single or separated, their children are in care. But a very interesting, because you were talking about numbers, very interesting and quite alarming statistic that the Greater Victoria Coalition just uncovered. The pattern of shelter users between 2010 to now, right? So the pattern of shelter users, the annual increase rate for non-Indigenous people is 1%. So over those 7 years.
1%.
For Indigenous shelter users, 35.6. So 36%. So when you couple that with the fact that Indigenous people are the fastest growing population in this country, most of which are under the age of 25, and you consider then that number of people who potentially, if we don't intervene and we don't have some means of prevention, and that we don't have sober conversations about what is it that is not working. Because, you know, people will ask me the question, why is it that there's such a disproportionate number of Indigenous people on the street? Well, I want to change that narrative. I want to change the discourse and actually ask the question, whether it be to housing providers, how many Indigenous people did you house last year? We need to, you know, get outside of the box. And, you know, often I would hear people being referred to as the hardest to house. That always just didn't strike a good chord with me. It's not that they're the hardest to house. It's that the system that we have created is not responsive and is not able to think outside of that Western model, the system that we have. And so much of our work with the coalition is, yes, we're looking at the immediate needs and supporting our Indigenous community, but there are systemic barriers that need to be challenged.
Actually, the next question is about the systematic barrier, but I would like to hear also from Gloria. You mentioned food, and which is part of the love. I mean, also shelter. And so, what do you think when you see this is very high numbers of Indigenous young, whether a man or a woman in the street on their own? What do you think about that, especially when they are in their own homeland?
Well, I should just give background on so what is the priority one? So we have the Aboriginal Coalition, our organization, but we have many different pilots and research that we're working on, and one of those pilots is the priority one. But the priority one dates back to last year. Our mayor, Lisa Helps, she brought together what was called the Priority 1 Task Force. And we had a mandate to work together for 1 year. Some very, very key organizations and people involved on that task force, from a judge, the chief of police, BC Housing, Island Health, Aboriginal Coalition. And the Priority 1 Task Force, with the help of those key organizations and Island Health, identified 74 of Victoria's most vulnerable and at risk. And there's quite an extensive list of criteria, but one of the common themes or threads throughout was that most of these individuals have been banned from housing. They've been banned from shelters. So this group has multiple barriers. And so 20 of the 74 self-identify as Indigenous. Mm-hmm. And so that's where kind of I came in, mm-hmm. and then was able to establish a partnership with the Victoria Kool-Aid Society, mm-hmm. to provide the housing, Island Health to provide the names of the individuals and their supports and some of the health-related or mental health-related challenges. But what our role through the Aboriginal Coalition was to lead this pilot. And when I say lead, it was to do things differently, to do it our way, how we would do it. And so from the outset, like Aunty Glo mentioned, it was about hand-picking the right people, the elder mentor, the cultural mentor, the one-on-one mentor, getting the community resource room where we could gather. But I'm very, very pleased to say tonight that those very high-risk individuals, we've been going now for 10 months, and they are still housed. Mm-hmm. That is not their pattern of remaining housed. And so that speaks volumes that give us a chance to do it our way. And what it is that we're doing is creating a sense of community, a sense of place, a sense of family. And we do that in ways like a normal family does. You have a birthday cake when it's your birthday, thanks to Aunty Glo. You have someone like Fred Rowland who's there on Wednesdays, and he doesn't take any guff, and he'll challenge them if they say something, and he'll give that cultural perspective. But I thought it would be just good to provide the frame around where Priority 1 came from.
And when that task by the city was the deadline of that task?
So about 4 months ago, the task force had met its 1-year mandate, mm-hmm. but doesn't mean it's over, mm-hmm. because now, like I said, this is a pilot, what we're doing, and then we report back periodically. But one of those findings with our group and the non-Indigenous group is that approximately 20 to 25% of the people that were on that list, the services or supports that we have just don't address their multiple barriers. And so we have to get back to the table because we can't leave those individuals, and we still need to look at different ways, different approaches, and so that work will be underway as well.
I would like to ask actually about the federal role here, because the federal government is responsible in actually in everything about what's happening to the Indigenous community, what their role in that. But before that question, I don't want to forget about it. I want to remember the Priority 1. Mm-hmm. It's very ambitious to go to find out about the Priority 1. But did they submit any report about, in the end, to the city? What are the priorities, or a list of them? Or, as you said, it's still ongoing process and until yet?
Yes. So from our end, for our pilot project, with Priority 1, I will be tasked mm-hmm. with creating a lessons learned mm-hmm. document at the end. So it will be made available so that other organizations or the Victoria Kool-Aid Society, that we document what we learned right from relationship building between organizations, intake, housing sustainability. You know, because one thing that I've learned is a lot of what our people, they're kind of under a spotlight of security and I don't know how to, surveillance, right? And that just becomes the norm, like in order for them to get supportive housing. And I mean, you need that because there are a lot of issues that arise, but you hear people say it's like being back in jail, or it's like, you know, it's that feeling of residential schools where you're told when you come and when you go. But why we're so, you know, pleased with working with the Victoria Kool-Aid Society is they are so flexible and wanting to learn and looking at ways for paradigm shifts. Like, how do we do this differently? And when one of the workers said, you know, we're learning from you guys because you're showing unconditional love and support. And really that's what it all drills down to, is that. And really, and I'm not there, and it's our team that are there and facing, you know, all the daily crises and all the rewards, the love, the laughter, and that's what we're trying to do, and not just look at health through the Western medical model of health, but what does health and wellness mean to us as Indigenous people? That's your spirit, your sense of peace, your room to laugh and share. That's health, right? And more than anything, a sense of purpose. So when people are on the street, they don't have a sense of purpose, and we're trying to help them to get that back, to see they have a place and they have a path. So what we did is we created with all of them life plans, or we also call them wellness plans, so they articulate their goals. And not only with the priority one, but the Aboriginal street community, I held a whole series of talking circles and focus groups, and we asked only 3 questions. Where do you want to be in 3 years? What barriers might come up? What supports will help you? And really, that is what has been the catalyst for the strategic direction that we're going in. We are working based on what they have told us are the barriers. As an example, Vic PD was named as a barrier.
Okay, good.
But also as a support, what they wanted as a support was to have an Aboriginal liaison police officer. And so this is what I mean by that has provided my job description, I guess. So I started having conversations with our chief of police, Del Manick, and we now have a year-long plan where we're working towards that Aboriginal liaison officer, but we're building relationships. So Vic PD, they're organizing 2 events. Aboriginal Coalition's organizing 2 events. He brings, you know, his out of uniform staff, and in fact, the social event that they planned, their first one, it's this Friday, and we are going to the Odeon Theatre to watch a movie at 11 o'clock on Friday. The Aboriginal street community, Victoria Police.
You mentioned the police as a barrier, and I said good, but I wanted to what I meant to mean. Good for talking about specific. Like, good to hear that they are pointing out some specific, like as you said, one of them is the police and how the not having an Indigenous person, but beside what I think also the feeling of justice that I don't think any Indigenous person will have that trust of a state that kind of, it's natural. It's that part of a state that took their culture away, they took their land, their everything. So there is many barrier beside that. And now this police supposed to be coming and give them justice. It's this we have that barrier, but at least when you want to improve something, you go toward little steps. At least, as you said, having some Indigenous members from the community working as a police or with the police to deal with this issue instead of the direct. What other specific you have as?
Yeah, so one of the things that they identified as a barrier was their health and needing to have help to, forgive my language, but I'm just going to say it verbatim. They said, we need a kick in the ass sometimes because of our health, whether it's HIV, Hep C, diabetes, you know, a whole myriad of health-related challenges. However, one of the supports that they listed that they thought would help them was to have Aboriginal nursing students to work with them. So I was able to access some funding from VIHA, from the Aboriginal Health Initiative Program, that provided us with the funds to bring the University of Victoria, Camosun College together, and we've created a framework document for Indigenous nursing practicum students to work with us. And we just actually, the two students organized an Indigenous Health and Wellness Day on November 1st. And so really it is our roadmap, that document. It's called Vision for Our Future. And you'll see some of their input in the video at the end. But it's my roadmap as to what barriers do I have to help them to chip away at. And whatever they've identified as a support, it's my task to go out and make sure that that happens.
And Gloria, what about the future? How do you think the coalition and the war going toward the future?
Well, I know Fran is under a microscope, and she has just worked hard, and like working with the police and working with the student nurses. It's been absolutely incredible to see it rolling and coming together, and it was slow, but it's wonderful to see. See, I've only been in the picture since December, and so I'm really new to this. And Fran comes from an academic world. I come from a traditional role, and as I say, I love it. They're my family.
And that's why obviously Fran seek that, because the traditional world, it's the core of all the Indigenous people life. And you plan forward. Fran.
Well, it's interesting Aunty Glo brings that up, because I never set out on this path. I'm not an expert in homelessness, you know, but the way the Creator works, I understand. I lost my own mother to the east side of Vancouver. And so when I took on this short-term contract, little did I know that 3 years later, I would be still here. And I recognize that the Creator has really taken me full circle, and it's that passion. And these are our people. I mean, the people we're working with, they're from Kwakwaka'wakw territory, they're from Tsartlip, they're from Gitskan, Inuit. And when you bring the cerebral with the heart, that's when change starts to happen. But looking into the future, the reason that I think we continue with this difficult work yet rewarding work is we have given hope. And once you see hope in their eyes, you can't leave. And you recognize, and when you see the things that they list as what would be helpful, they are so simple. They're not asking for a lot for their own wellness and well-being. And we have to remember that all of the government language, all of the, whatever you're hearing in the news about affordable housing and all of this, you know, money, that's great. We need affordable housing. that doesn't, to any degree that's necessary, trickle down to the people on the streets. They're not going to have housing with affordable housing. They need supportive housing. They need culture. We need to feed the spirit as much as the physical person. And if we're going to successfully combat this, we really need to deal with the systemic structures, the paternalistic attitudes that are age-old, where non-Indigenous organizations and governments dictate and think that they know what our people need. And I can't emphasize that enough. And if the pilot project with Priority 1 just helps us to give that evidence-based knowledge and that little bit of information to say, how is it that they're still housed? And it boils down to something as simple as love, acceptance, sharing of food, strengthening self-identity. It's really quite easy, you know? Housing is political, poverty is political. And so that's what really prompted me with the Aboriginal Coalition. We have political leaders on our board, and I want to acknowledge Chief Don Tom of the Tsartlip First Nation here. He brought to the BC Assembly of First Nations last year a motion to support our organization.
Great.
Considering we're off reserve and urban organization, they supported us by way of a resolution. So that's what makes the feds and the province and, you know, kind of wake up and listen as well. So we have to not fool ourselves. Housing's political, or we'd have lots of housing on reserve. And so that's the reality that we're in.
I think in simple words, in any civilized society, housing and food is a right. It's a human right. It's not but the idea about affordable housing, and when you talk about these prices, it's not affordable to anybody. And it's just talk. It's the whole mentality of making profit and money. It seems like it's the elephant in the room here. And
yes.
and as you said, a lot of these member of the community, relative and part of families, you see them on the street. So it's and you just answered the question about the federal government, that they are just to start to listen, as you said. I hope they are listening. Not coming from one ear, going out from the other ear, as they say.
Well, I'm sure that, you know, it's when it comes to the Indigenous person, there's always that age-old, well, on reserve, off reserve. And, you know, quite honestly, I don't think this should be a provincial challenge or a municipal challenge. The federal government is responsible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's even here that division also, because we know registered, not registered, off reserve, on reserve, and it's all these band member, not band member. It's so I don't know anyway.
Over 50% of our people are now living in urban centers. Again, another reality that we have to adjust and revise our approaches.
Thanks a lot, Fran and Gloria, for being on the show and give us all these new great talk. And again, I hope the one on the top, the one who steer our government, when they listen and to find a solution for an issue like
Thank you. And thank you, Aunty Glo, for being here.
Thanks. And thanks for watching this part of Indigenous Voice. Welcome back to the second part of Indigenous Voice. And in this part, we have with us Muzz Sampson. And Muzz is a friend of mine, and we talked previously about some issue that concern him and concern many other Indigenous community members, like, for example, fishing or going hunting in their own land. But we'll start first. Muzz, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I come from, both my parents are passed on now. My mother was Nimipu, Nez Perce, which means first people. And my dad was Coast Salish, so one of the things we learned from our parents is how to live off the land, for one. You know, we weren't allowed to sit around even during the summertime. We weren't allowed to sit around. We had to go and, you know, take up the fishing, hunting, clam digging along with our older brothers. But I started off with my late parents digging clams. I've been digging clams since I've been 6 years old. And one of the things we struggle with is that the government doesn't believe we know how to clean our own produce stuff that we put out, you know, to each other. Dried clams, smoked salmon, deer jerky, all these smoked oysters, smoked cod, all these things that are on our diet. There's a lot more that, a lot of the seafood that, which kept us healthy. You know, we got almost every part of the vitamins from the land animals, the seafood. One of the things that our people always thrived on was deer meat and salmon, which deer meat is, you know, high in vitamin D, which our bodies, what our whole body needs is that vitamin D. And then you get the omega in the salmon and the calcium from clams, the iodine from quechua, the sea urchin. So there are all these vitamins we're not eating it amongst ourselves. So our DNA has kind of changed because we're all become very sickly people now. We struggle with diabetes, which is very high in all our communities up and down the island and through into the U.S., where a lot of our people are suffering with diabetes at, you know, at very high rates through all reserves everywhere. And it's because we're forced away from living off the land to see all these foods that contain the medicines we need, that we don't need to go buy off the store shelf for vitamin D or calcium or anything. It was all in our food. And that's what our elders taught us, is that our medicine is in our food, and that I strongly believe.
And the most important thing, that you're trying to get something to feed yourself, not just only talking about health, about something to eat. I mean, and in the end, it's not on a mass scale. You respect what you get, the animal that you hunt, you don't do that if you're with a full stomach, for example. Meanwhile, we see all this mass fishing and overfishing everywhere, and without any kind of the government jump in and try to stop it. So before talking about what happened when you go to do your traditional way of hunting or getting clams, where do you go? What the streams are you go to gather your food from?
Well, I fished up and down this island, dug some clams in different areas up and down this island. So I've had a wide range of areas where I've gone and hunted, fished, dug clams, gathered crabs, prawns, and that's one of the things that has divided our people is, you know, when we go into certain territories, oh, this is my territory, you know, and the South Island was open for, because my great grandparents, they actually had a shack not too far from here when they used to come gather the different seafood out this way in James Bay area, and the different medicines that we use, like Beacon Hill has a lot of cooked meat, or used to, which we use for spiritual reasons, and it's also one of the medicines that's good for diabetes is the cockmean that we drink, which is wild celery seed. So these medicines that we've learned about when we were young is what the children don't know today, a lot of the things that they should be knowing. What our people had thrived on is the different medicines they use to stay healthy. Take pulling, for instance. There's a medicine that called a Puller's medicine, and it flushes your system right out. And it's kind of like a sweat lodge, but the medicine is a quicker reaction to a lot fast for some people. It depends on, I guess, your metabolism. I guess but and there's other medicines that I use that will clear your stomach from your stomach up. Take all that heavy grease, toxins out, and they're all around my own home. So I don't have to go to the drugstore. I just go outside where my drugstore is, like I was taught by my elders.
So no drugstore and no grocery. It seemed like we are confusing the subject. You see more on the medicine side, like a doctor. We are talking about fishing and hunting, which is great.
Because that's all gathered together.
Muzz, when you go to do that, the way that when you were 6 years old, your family taught you to do traditional way of hunting or gathering clam, or what will happen if like a conservation officer or an RCMB, saw you? Or take us through your trip when you go for hunting.
Well, one of the things that we have always had a problem with, doesn't matter if it's fisheries conservation, they have always seemed to have a law that will continue to stop us. And even though it's stated in our treaty that we can hunt and fish for all time, that still hasn't taken place. That historical treaty that was designed back in 1854, it still hasn't been honored today because we're still going to jail just for providing food.
So this is how they stop you. They send you to jail.
Yes. Okay. And my late brother, he went to the Supreme Court. Him and a couple of my other family members went to the Supreme Court. And one of the police officers actually wanted to shoot him for 2 fish. Okay. And this one went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court judge said, leave these people alone. They have every right to live their lifestyle. So even with the Supreme Court rulings of leaving us alone to do gathering our foods or medicines, that still hasn't taken place. I've gone to jail for a couple of cultural issues. And
like what?
Well, I was gathering food for one of our sacred burnings, and I was stopped by fisheries. But I wasn't the only one. I just got to the beach, and there was about a dozen other guys, and they were walking by, and the fisheries can see them clear walking by, but they never did anything with those guys. So some of us are kind of selected and picked out to taunt or harass. And that's what I feel. I feel I'm being harassed each time because I'm always looking over my back when I'm out clam digging or hunting, because the methods and the volatile actions that they take on our people is, it's just unreal sometimes. I've had my clams taken right out of my car by fishery officers. They've gone into our homes and taken the meat right out of our freezers. So they're stealing from people that are poverty stricken, and they're bringing them to the food shelters in town. Not that I have anything against that. Poor is poor. But they shouldn't have to take something from our people,
From a poor to another poor.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't make sense that you take the land from the indigenous community and then you tell them, no, you cannot fish or hunt. It's so beside the prison, the conservation officer can have this authority to, or they call the RCMP, for example?
Well, from what the RCMP told me, we had a meeting with them, me and my late friend and a couple of my brothers. It was this time of year, fishing season. So we talked to the native RCMP and the staff sergeant about, not harassing us and just leave us alone, let us do our fishing. And we talked about many other treaty issues. And the RCMP says, well, I know all that. And he said, for one, we're not supposed to interfere with fisheries or conservation. That's their job. So RCMP or federal provincial police, they're not supposed to interfere. And that's coming right from a staff sergeant himself saying that we can't interfere with fisheries, but they're always the first ones on the scene. And during that meeting, we asked them, is it part of your protocol to unclip their gun while walking up to a native? Because that's what they do a lot of the times when they're approaching us natives, whether it's hunting, fishing, clam digging, gathering medicine, or whatever. And these are the methods that they use, the scare tactics they use, or the things that, will frighten people away from it. I've had quite a few of my friends quit fishing because our fisheries have taunted them to, stay away from fishing, or we're going to charge you, we're going to take your boat, we're going to take your motor, we're going to take everything, we're going to seize it. And they're actually breaking their own law of trespassing, for one. We have had many meetings. My brother Tesluk, we met with the environmentalists, the RCMP, fisheries. We told them that we don't need to be taunted or harassed. I said we have our own cleaning method of what we do with our food. We've been doing it. I learned from my dad when I was 6 years old, my late father, how to clean clams. And clams pretty much clean themselves because they have bivalve muscles. They'll spit out whatever they take in. So it takes maybe about a 16-hour period before all that stuff comes out of the clams. And what I usually do is I bring them home and I put them in a clean container of clean salt water, sea salt. So the depuration cleaning is very simple, which most people don't know. I think we shouldn't have to go through all this harassment where we have to get everything approved by the government. Oh, can we go digging here? Can we go hunting there? Because all our territories are blocked off by either construction, what's going on up with the contaminated dump in Shawnigan Lake.
And now we have the LNG and all this project. So since you were 6 years old, know about fishing here. And how has changed so far from you 6 years old until today? I know when you go out fishing, you go for maybe to feed your own self or your family. You are not going to go overfishing. But how is it now? Is it big companies going there, doing the fishing?
Well, one of the things that happened to us one night was we were digging in Gulfstream, and fisheries got there and they kicked us out. So we took off. We went up further up towards up island.
Okay.
And then as we were going up, we seen a whole bunch of clam diggers, commercial diggers going there. So that's what they're doing with our bay in Brentwood Bay, is they're allowing the commercial industries to wipe out a lot of the resources. And that's not counting all the spills that have happened in our area that, hit the salmon spawning grounds. The spill that they had in, I think it was about 4 years ago now. The run has changed a lot. I mean, this year's run the beginning of the run was very, very bad.
Okay, so there's a dramatic change since when you were 6 years old and now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And most of it is because of construction that goes up all around the bay or lakes or wherever, where there's developers are ruining a lot of the land. Once they dig up something, all that runoff is always going to go down to the bay, or all the water heads to the stream or one of the rivers. And to see this type of pollution happening, where when I grew up, the waters were crystal clear, there was a great abundance of salmon. And compared to what my older brother Tom went through, he's seen a lot more of what I did. Like, he talked about the bay frozen all the way across when he was a child. When I was a child, it was only maybe almost halfway of the water. How different and how warm it's got since Tom's time as a child and my time as a child. Maybe about 50 years, maybe 60 years. So in that 60 years, a lot of the resources that our people depended on aren't there no more because of the environment being damaged. Like I was saying, the developers over in the Bamberton area, when they were trying to put up townhomes in that area, there used to be 155 cod beds along that Bamberton bank. but we don't know if they returned because of all the blasting they did there. So the developers, they ruin a lot of things. They ruin a lot of underground streams that our people know where they used to come out and where they used to be. They're all drying up. I mean, with the global warming, the farm fishing, all these things that our people depend on, the bears, all these things are being sold off to other countries. Take the bear, for instance. I was listening on the radio last week where over in, I think it's Auburn or somewhere in that area in the States, in one of the hunting shops, they're raffling off tickets for a BC black bear hunt. So our resources are being sold to the Americans as well. So what can we do when we try to protect it? And each time we protest or put up a blockade, we've seen them go to great extents of stopping, just like what they did at Standing Rock.
Exactly.
Exactly. That's the method they use.
And I'm glad, Muzz, I'm glad you mentioned that because I'm getting the sign that we are out of time. But you mentioned the elephant in the room, the American, how they would treat everything as a commodity.
Yeah.
It's going everywhere. But once again, Muzz, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, yes.
And we need to talk more about more issue. I hope we don't have the time, but for the future, I hope.
Oh, yeah.
Episode.
Oh, for sure.
Thank you. And thanks for watching this part of Indigenous Voice.